Hello, friends, and welcome once again to our Community Center Development Foundations mini course. Today, we're going to be talking about the ownership principle. When a community has the power to set the vision for their projects, use their own resources, and do the work themselves, they have a far greater chance of success. Okay, I have a little exercise to start this time with you. Right, you'll see in a moment a bunch of houses all in a row. So take a look at these houses and imagine those little phrases below is your relationship with that house. So the first one says, "This is my home, I live in it." The second one is, "This is my home, I bought it." The third is, "This is my home, I rent it." And the last one is, "This is my home, I built it." So think about that and imagine this metaphor for a moment. And I want you to think about who out of those people have the greatest ownership. Is it the one who lives in it, bought it, rent it, or built it? All right, what did you say? I'm guessing that you probably said that this is my house and I built it. So I want you to imagine this whole exercise as a metaphor for the ownership of a community. So you might envision like renting or living in that house is community members who are doing a project for an NGO or something like that. And I'm sure that when you asked the question, who had the greatest ownership, you said built it. But why? In Canada, we say it's because you put your blood, sweat, and tears into it. And what does that mean? So the term blood, your blood, sweat, and tears, blood, it's like sacrifice. It implies that you risked something and that it might hurt in the process, hence the term blood. A term for this risk and sacrifice here in North America is something called skin in the game. Warren Buffett is a famous businessman who coined this term. And he got started in the business world by investing and convincing investors to trust him with their money because he himself was placing his own money in that same pot. And he called it having skin in the game. And since then, that term has been upheld as a foundational principle for a sustainable business investment because it implies risk. So the second word out of blood, sweat, and tears is the word sweat, which implies work. You worked hard for it. You might have put your physical or emotional or physical might and effort into it. And it required the sacrifice of maybe time or finances or physical exertion to do so. And the third word is tears. That implies connection. You have become emotionally attached to it, for better or for worse. And there's a deep sense of worth and purpose and importance for this thing. So why is ownership so important in community development? Because when we risk and sacrifice for something, we place value on it. And when we have value on it, it leads us to care, to nurture, and to improve it. It leads us to take responsibility for it. For example, in earth care, when we have value in stewarding ecology, we actually then want to care for it and we want to nurture it and we want to improve it. Now imagine if every community member had that deep sense of ownership for their community, a deep sense of value and responsibility to care, nurture, and improve it. I'm going to pass the microphone over to Jamie, who's going to tell us a little story about a lesson that he learned in ownership.
Yeah, thanks, Daniela. We're all on a journey around this subject of ownership, and especially as leaders, it's really easy to take ownership yourself, but to pass it on to others is sometimes difficult. And I think back early in my journey of understanding this concept, and this story comes to mind from Africa. And I had been working for a development agency at the time. There was a donor who wanted to build this library in a small African community. And in the back of my mind, I thought, well, maybe this is not the best idea. I knew it was important for the local community to be involved in the project, So we made an arrangement that if we provide some seed funding for this project, we'll need the local people to provide some labor and make a plan to operate and maintain the library. So about 6 months later, I was in the office and I got an email and it said this: there's a leak in the roof of your library. And so I realized at that time we hadn't given them the opportunity to start with their own vision and invest their blood, sweat, and tears into it. And in that way, we had done the community a disservice. It wasn't their fault that they were passing the responsibility on to us. It was never their responsibility to begin with. We hadn't given them a chance to grow their community muscles, so to speak, and to function effectively as a community. And I use that term seed funding. We often hear that term in development circles. And in some ways, it sounds sensible enough. You know, if we just had a little bit of money to start out with, we could really grow something substantial. But the problem is that it assumes that the seed needs to come from outside of the community. And this is the biggest difference with community centered development, with the organic the ownership principle is really all about is that seed's already there and you have the ability to start with what already exists in the community. So when we think about the communities we're working with and we think about the projects that we're involved in, what are some of the signs of ownership? How do we see it and how can we be aware of where it is and fostering the growth of ownership? And so here's a little um, visual kind of that helps us to sort of have an idea of what those indicators are. And so this is just a fun way to look at different parts of the body as representing ownership. And so the first one we'll look at is the eyes. So really that asks the question, whose vision is it? Well, this is a critical part of developing ownership in the communities you work with. If the vision for the project came from within the community, well, they're going to be more likely to take ownership of it. Second one is the hands. So it's asking the question, where did the labor and the materials come from? They came from within the community. Obviously, they're going to be more likely to take ownership of what's going to happen there. And then we look at skin, and it goes back to what Daniela was alluding to. Is there skin in the game? Has the community made sacrifices? And if they have poured some blood and sweat and tears into it, they're more likely to take ownership of the outcomes. And then the feet. Is there already movement on this project? Or is it just an idea? Is it just a proposal that someone has? Because if the community has already taken steps to self-mobilize, taken action to begin, again, they're going to be more likely to have a sense of ownership. Excuse me. And lastly, the body. Are all the parts working together? Is there sharing, generosity, collaboration? Because that kind of community investment is another indicator that there's going to be a greater sense of ownership surrounding it. So that's just sort of a quick and fun way to think about it and almost do a self-assessment in the way, are we seeing ownership? As leaders, it's one thing to do an assessment and a reflection on the work we're doing, but we also want to ask the question, what can we do to create ownership? What can we do to influence the sense of ownership that a community has? And so we have this little scale, and it's just an interesting way to think through this sort of pathway towards greater ownership. And it's sort of a scale from the beginning of the least empowering, moving towards the most empowering. And you can maybe situate yourself somewhere on the scale in terms of how you are fostering ownership as a leader. And so quickly we'll look at them. The first one is, as leaders, we simply ignore the people that we're working with because we have the ideas, we have the power, and the expertise to drive this project along. And so the community voices, needs, and interests don't matter. Well, the second one is we inform them of what we're doing. And so really looking to appease their interests and make sure that they're okay with what we're doing, but really they don't have any sense of ownership and collaboration in the process. And thirdly, we consult with them. So we're going to listen a little bit and hear what they have to say, learn about their community. And so we care and inquire about what the community thinks and feels. The fourth one is involve. And so we're actually giving them more of a voice. The community is participating in both the planning and the execution of the project. And so a lot more involvement, a lot more skin in the game, but still lacking in the area of authority and control. And so moving into the next one, we have collaborate. We really truly collaborate. And that's coming to the level of partnership where now we're really sharing in a very mutual sense. What is the vision for what we're doing? And finding ways to share authority and share control and find consensus in what needs to happen. And so we're really moving towards a shared level of ownership. And then the ultimate along this grid, along this pathway, is where we defer and we say, no, you're in control. This is your community. This is your project. You have ownership in what happens here. And as leaders, you're still making yourself available to them. But the community is unlocking their collective power and capacity for transformative solutions. So as leaders, it's important for us to be conscious of where we are on this spectrum. And maybe with different communities that you're working with, you're in a different place in with each of them. And so I want you to think about this as a journey. This is not something that you're going to perfect. It's not black and white, right? We're going to find ourselves in a bit of a gray area. And really, this grid revolves around these questions of whose ideas are we starting with? Who is taking action? Who's in control? And who has authority? And you might find yourself working with the community who's not ready for total ownership. If you say, it's up to you, you're in control, what will you do? And you're going to find with your wisdom and experience that they're going to need a little bit more hand-holding, but ultimately you're journeying towards a reality in which you're recognizing that they do have the capacity to make change. And so really it's a matter of giving them the confidence to go ahead and enact that capacity, to live into that capacity. And so this just gives you a rough guideline, a way to sort of frame the progress that you're making in the community. So I'll turn it over to Kendra.
Thanks, Jamie. This ownership scale, I think, is so helpful for helping us as leaders consider how we move from marginalized communities to ownership in communities. And as leaders, you guys are community change makers, and you're probably asking the question, how do we activate this in our community? How do we unlock ownership and help our community recognize that they are capable of making meaningful change? And of course, that's our joy as leaders, to help activate our communities in a certain direction toward transformation. So this course is all about principles. The next course, Community-Centered Development Facilitation, is all about practical tools and skills. And so in the next phase of this, we give lots of tools and practical skills and tips and tricks about how to actually move our communities into spaces of ownership. But I'm going to just give us a little bit of a sense now here in this to get your imagination going about what's possible when our communities become engaged and are on board toward transformation and change. But the ownership has to happen at the very beginning of the process. The first phase of the process is discover. Okay, and that's all about unlocking imagination for what's possible and activating ownership. It's all about building trust. And helping our communities feel heard and valued, and like the change agents that they are. In the process of discovery, the aim is not to impose our ideas as leaders, but to expose what's already happening in our communities and let that momentum guide and lead the process. I'm going to share a quick story from a friend, John Massimi in Kitchener, Ontario. He was given the role, he's a priest. He was given the role for the city of Kitchener to manage community centers. And at the very beginning of his role, he was getting all these security complaints from a particular community center. People were saying, there's a group of young people and they're loitering, they're just hanging around, they're making trouble, they're breaking into the vending machines, and they're causing disruptions. And so John Massimi was like, okay, I'm gonna come and I'm just gonna sit and see what takes place. He noticed that all the complaints were coming in at the same time of day, right after school. So he took his laptop and he sat down in the lobby and he just observed what he could see. He took a posture of curiosity. And what he noticed was it was a group of young kids, they like teenagers, and they didn't have anything really to do. So they were just like in the lobby. There was no space for them that was dedicated for them to feel like comfortable to be and recreate. They were breaking into vending machines. So he wondered, are they hungry? It's just after school. And they didn't have relationship with anyone else in the community center. So he noticed all of these things right off the bat. And he started with a simple question. He just approached the young people and said, my name's John. I'm here. I'm leading the community centers. And I'm just wondering, are you guys hungry? And they all said, yes, we're hungry. And he said, what's the best pizza place in town? I'll buy the pizza. Let's go. So he's walking down the street with 40 kids following him. He bought 8 pizzas, brought it back to the community center, and just sat down and started asking them questions. And he learned, yes, they're hungry. He learned that they don't really know anyone else in the community center. He learned that they felt like they wanted a place where they could have like gym time, where they could play basketball and hang out and not feel like they weren't welcome. And so over time, he began to do this weekly, meeting with the kids. He brought his staff members and other community members along, and they started to build relationship. They started to ask them questions. They started to activate their ownership of what they could do with that space. And these kids decided they wanted to do a dodgeball tournament, decided that they wanted to take cooking classes, decided that they wanted to teach classes to one another. And this flourished and developed into something really beautiful. And the security complaints after this process ceased. There were no more security complaints because these kids had a place to belong, they had relationship, and they had their basic needs met. And all of this was begun with a question: what's already happening here? Asking the kids, what is it that you want to see this space used for? Giving them ownership in the process, and this beautiful flourishing experience unfolded. And this is all about activating ownership on the front end of a process. And this is our role as leaders to help build trust and engage ownership from the beginning of the process. So here is a couple questions we compiled for us as community leaders to help us begin thinking about ownership and help us begin thinking about how we can activate ownership in our communities. So here are some questions for us to consider. Where is there motion and initiative already? What's happening already? And where do we see people working together? It's all about coming in with our glasses of curiosity and our observation skills to see what's already going on. What are people already passionate about? So that's question number 2. What are people already passionate about, and what do people seem to care about? And these things, right, we can get at these questions by asking them, right? We can observe, and then we can invite our community members to a space and ask them, what do you care about? What do you see in this community where people are already coming together? And then finally, the third question is, where have you seen blood, sweat, and tears hit the ground in our community? So just like Daniela was talking about at the beginning, where are people putting their energies and efforts? Where are their hearts engaged? Where are their minds engaged? And this is where we have some cool tools to give you as community-centered development leaders and facilitators. We have tools like asset mapping, individual capacities mapping, getting people to think about what they bring to the table and how they could contribute to a community initiative. Timeline exercises where we take the community through remembering their story, which often reveals what a community cares about. So these are just a couple questions for you to consider as you think about activating ownership. I love this quote from Tos Mukwa. He has been with 5 and 2 since the very beginning. He's a founder and leader of this beautiful network. And he says, "We forget we are human beings with capacity to change our lives. The CCD approach helps people recognize their capacity, organize themselves, decide their future, and make meaningful change." And this is our role as CCD facilitators and leaders. We help our community recognize their own capacity, see what they bring to the table, and become aware of the fact that they are change makers who are capable of making meaningful and lasting change in their communities. So activating ownership takes time, and it takes building trust. And as we always say, one of our core principles and values in everything we do is about moving at the speed of relationship and the pace of trust. So curiosity is a great way to begin activating ownership in our community. Of course, the community-centered development process takes time, right? And often we want to see quick results. But if we're moving at the pace of relationship and trust and ownership, often the right thing comes slowly, and we want that right thing slowly as opposed to the wrong thing right away. Okay, so it's worth it. It's worth it activating ownership in our community at the very beginning of a process. We're really looking forward to hearing what these thoughts have jogged in your own memory and experience. When we come together this week at our co-learning session, we can't wait to hear where you've seen ownership work in your community, where you've learned how to activate ownership, or where you're curious, how could I do this? Bring your questions, bring your concerns, bring your experiences and your words of wisdom. We're really looking forward to discussing this together. All right, you guys, thanks so much, and we will see you soon.